Anything else?
But I'd like to talk about the tour with the Housing Authority.
Okay. How about that being D.5?
I can do wherever you want to put it.
Okay. Before we go into exec, Peggy.
I have two, one related to that, and more broadly, our future study session items, somewhat in connection with email from Councilmember Taylor about the change on the LHA meeting. Right, changing the date. So I'd like us to talk about study session items, including when to change that, and maybe something to substitute for that night, for the night that was scheduled.
So this would be D.75, study session topics?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
And then,
Or it can be part of D5.
Alrighty.
this would take just a second, we need to schedule and give heads up for the city attorney annual evaluation, which is a couple months away, but still we need
Okay.
to,
Heads up, city attorney. Your evaluation is coming. How about if we just,
well, we schedule maybe when we think we want to do it. So it's a scheduling item.
okay. Anything else? Then our agenda is approved with those slight modifications. Which brings us to item formally B, which is the hazmat roundup and Littleton calendar.
Charlie Boston, Director of Public Services, can handle the first item, and then Kelly Nardi, Director of Communications, will handle the second item. So, Kelly, maybe we can get you up to the table, too.
As Jim indicated, I'm going to handle the first item, and that's the household hazardous waste. This item was cut from the budget due to financial situation in our department. Typically, we had $13,000 in there. The city of Englewood is still planning to go ahead with the program, which is 2 Saturdays in September. I've included some statistics on the second sheet and a memo from the city of Englewood as well, indicating their interest to do it another year. Obviously, there are a number of Littleton residents over the years that have participated in this program, and also you can see what our costs were. In 2010, it did drop quite a bit, but we typically budget $13,000 for this program. If you wish to change the direction of the household hazardous waste program, we suggested 2 items that you could look at, 2 programs. One is Jefferson County, where you actually take the material to them and drop it off at a cost. It's pretty high, but you can do it 360, well, not that much, 52 weeks a year you can do it. And the other one, the curbside program, is where this company comes and picks that up at your house, and typically they would charge $100 to $120, and the city could subsidize that until we ran out of money, and then say to anybody who wanted to do it again, you can participate next year. Personally, I think the existing program that we had from 2010 through, or 1998 through 2010, worked just as fine, and people were pleased with it at a reasonable cost. So if council wishes to pursue this program again, I will need the money. I don't have it in the 2010 budget.
You mean the 2011?
2011, I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Charlie, how much is the copay with the Englewood?
It runs about $20. People show up with their trunk or a pickup truck or whatever they have, and typically we charge $20.
And when don't you charge 20? I mean, what do you do if you don't charge 20?
We charge a minimum of 20 to everybody.
Okay, and then,
You know, on occasion, they've had somebody show up with a van full of stuff, and so there would be an additional charge for that.
okay.
But for 90% of the participants in the program, there's a $20 copay, which most people are most willing to pay and to get rid of their waste. And it is all disposed of either environmentally correctly or recycled. On occasion, they do bring material that we can, or the company does. It's a private company that handles the program, and we pay to the private company.
Thank you.
Questions for Charlie?
Yes, Charlie. Certainly, it's been a valuable program in the past. Knowing that you don't have it within your department in the budget, my thinking is that when we take the next look at the overall budget status on May 15th, that might be a good time to consider this item. But what is the lead time that you would need prior to those 2 Saturdays in September?
I think we have to give Englewood notice probably no later than the middle to the end of May in order to become a participant in the program.
So we could, without causing disruption to the schedule, consider this.
We could
when-
do it then, yes. That's only 2 months from now, 2.5.
And that would still give lead time for the Littleton report?
Yes,
Yeah,
When-
you do it in the fall, right?
In September?
September.
Yeah, that's fine.
Bruce?
Refresh my memory, we did the budget, Jim, with an expectation that Marjorie's position at the library was funded, right?
Yes, sir.
So technically, it wouldn't be inaccurate to potentially use some of the cost savings out of those two positions folded into one with Tim Nims being responsible for both, to argue that we've got some savings there that we theoretically could apply to this if we so chose to do that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I don't, from your standpoint, I suppose it'd be poor form to just point everybody to Englewood and say, drop it off there, eh? I'm kidding.
I would like to see us go ahead and approve this, because there is some excess funds in there a little bit that would cover this, and it's a program that the citizens of Littleton really appreciate.
I agree that they appreciate it if we had a source to take the funds from. But part of what's happening here is we went through the budget process. We said we were going to cut different departments by an amount that it took to get to where our budgeted expenditures matched what we thought our budgeted revenues would be. We did that. This is part of that cut, so it's, the chickens are now coming home to roost.
But does that not take into account, that doesn't take into account the issue of the library and the museum now being managed by one individual instead of two?
It doesn't. I guess the question is if you were to look at all the items that you cut, would this rise to the top of the list to be the ones that you wanted to fund? Mm-hmm. And if we do them piece by piece, then the answer is we haven't taken them all into consideration.
So, okay, so the argument then would be, are you saying that from Phil's perspective or Phil's comment that if we looked at it in April, we've still got bandwidth or we've still got runway to decide?
Well,
Let me just add one footnote to that, Mayor. I think you have an accurate description of your budget process. I would just remind council, though, these are two items that you specifically ask staff to bring back when you cut them. So,
okay.
These were two that you pointed out, just said, hey, we want to get through, we want to see the end-of-year numbers, so you did ask for these two specifically out of all those to come back. So, if you want to wait, as Councilman Cernanek said, you have your next review assessment of the revenues expenditures scheduled for May
15.
Yes, sir.
Jim?
Well,
No later than that.
you have framed it, I think, very accurately. It's not the highest on my priority list to fund. However, I am very concerned about the chemicals going down the drain and our sewer plant then having to deal with it. It's much better to fund a program like this as opposed to having potential violations that we can't get all these chemicals out at the sewer plant. So it's really a catch-22. You fund it to prevent them from going down the drain, because that's what I'm afraid will happen.
Well, they may go down one drain, or they may get just dumped on the ground and go into the ground and get into the river. So it's a health safety issue in larger ways for me. I mean, in addition to what you just said. So, can I make a motion?
Please do.
Okay, so I move that when we get the second quarter budget update discussion, we consider these two items. That's May 15th.
So you're moving to postpone these until we have the budget update session?
Well, we don't have a motion to postpone, it's just put them on that.
True, we don't have a motion on the floor at all. So you're moving to reconsider, bring these up in May?
Yeah,
Okay. Both?
yes.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Question for Kelly on that. What does that do in terms of timing on the calendar?
Well, just going back to what Jim said, is that when we had the budget discussion in the fall, the question that was asked of me is, what's your drop dead date to do the calendar? And I said first quarter. And so that's why we scheduled it for the March study session, and I don't know exactly what Charlie said. We can still get it done. That's really tight, though. But we could still do it.
You want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to remove the Littleton calendar from consideration on May 15th.
I'll second that.
Okay. Been moved and seconded to take the calendar up tonight. Discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. All right, back to the main motion, which is to delay now just the hazardous waste until May. Discussion? Bruce?
I think we're talking literally $13,000 here.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with what your motion is and what Phil said, based on what Charlie's indicating the deadline. I think we can address, but on the other hand, in the grand scheme of things, given that we've got funding, I'm inclined to just deal with it now and get through it, but just throwing that out there.
Okay. So that's a no vote.
Probably.
Phil?
I think there's probably other items that may bubble up for consideration. At least at the time that Doug Farman was before us presenting the update on February 15th, he said there's nothing to change revenue or expenditures at this point in time. We had given him the charge, or at least an informal charge, to bring that, to see what we could be doing to be in balance by the May 15th report. And so, on principle, I'm going to be for this.
Any other discussion? Peggy?
Yeah, given that we don't even have the first quarter results yet on the revenues and expenditures, and given the rather volatile oil prices, which can significantly impact us, even though various staff have contingencies for some buffer, but with what's going on in the Middle East, I'm anxious that we may have enough buffer for that, and with those prices going up. So I think it's wise for us to wait to make this decision.
Okay, I have a question. We're really talking 4,500, aren't we, instead of 13,000?
We have always budgeted $13,000 in the anticipation of a certain number of participants being there and the cost in the company. But that was our annual budget in the past couple of years. Now, sometimes we have spent more or less. It's always been under. Yeah. But as you
I
can,
guess that's dependent on what they bring, isn't it? Okay.
yeah, how many people participate? in what
See
they
here,
do?
it was 12,000 in '08, 10,000 '09, and then 4,500.
Okay. Any other discussion? The motion is to bring back up the hazardous waste in May. All in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Okay. It passes 4-3. It's only 7, with Bruce, Deb, and Jose voting against. So that'll be brought up in May. Kelly?
Can I go home now?
Use the microphone, Kelly. Use the
No,
microphone.
sorry. We voted to keep you on.
Council, I gave you a memo that has a lot of the data on how many we print, how much it costs, what we pay the sponsors, how much revenue, or what we pay the winning photographers, how much revenue we bring in from the sponsors. I'm also giving you a recommendation that we not attempt to print it and then sell it. I did meet with Carol Breedup from the Fine Arts Committee, and we had a good talk, and we brainstormed a lot of different ideas, but it's really problematic to attempt to sell it. For one, not having done it before, how do you know how many to print? Are you really going to be able to sell 15,000? Should you cut that in half? Should you cut it by a third? It also raises issues with the sponsors because they pay $350. They get 350 calendars for free. So you have a situation where people could run up to Littleton Hospital and get a free one or come somewhere else to purchase one. The other issue is where we sell them. We're really not set up in this building to do any retail transactions. The library and the museum are. I have not talked to the director over there about how they would feel about the prospect of selling 8,000 or 10,000 calendars over there. So I did take a look at the copy center budget. There's a line item in the copy center that's a citywide, where phones are consolidated, postage is consolidated, printing and binding is consolidated into one account. And I did look at the numbers that the actuals for last year. It would be my recommendation that if you want to continue to do the calendar, that we take the funds from the printing and binding budget.
Questions?
Kelly, what's the status of this budget year to date, the printing and binding? Do you know?
I didn't look at what it is this year to date.
Kim, do you have any idea?
You know, I don't, although Wendy sent us an email. I don't. The answer's no. I
The
don't.
city clerk is responsible for.
Yeah, but I
copies.
can't give you a to-date report on it. She thought that looking at their early expenses, that Kelly's proposal was reasonable, but I can't give you the actual numbers.
Jim?
The 4,000 that we put in the budget, would that print the annual report without the calendar? Because we've got to do an annual report.
Yeah, we do, and the truth of the matter is, we did an annual report without the calendar and the photography contest. Primarily, we'd probably just post that online and print a pretty small number of copies to make available at city buildings. So that number would be more than adequate.
How much are the sponsorships?
350 for the 12. Each of the months of the year has a sponsor, and they pay $350. Carol and I did talk about also increasing that sponsorship amount, but we thought you can't raise that sponsorship amount enough to pay for the calendar. It would just be cost prohibitive. I couldn't imagine anybody but the hospital would be able to afford that, because we have everything from Littleton Hospital and Aspen Grove to a local realtor as sponsors of it. So it's always been at $350 ever since I've been here for 20 years. We've never raised it.
Is there any way that you could put additional sponsors on there?
Carol and I talked about that too. We do have some sponsors on the back page, a few of them. There's, I think, 3 of those left that pay $75 each. That's traditionally been really hard to sell. We've had businesses, the Spinning Wheel, for one, was a sponsor, and when they closed, maybe I'm not a very good salesman, but it hasn't been easy to get other people to sponsor that back page, because that back page sits up against the wall all year.
Well, I've had a lot of people come in and say that they would be more than happy to pay for it, but I understand also what the problem would be in trying to sell it, especially with sponsorships getting so many. But I know there are some businesses that would probably sponsor for $75 to $100. That might help out.
Well, and Carol and I did look at it. I brought some with me about where would you put other sponsors?
Yeah.
Where would you place their ads? This is the only thing we do in the city that takes sponsorships.
Yeah.
Nothing else does.
Bruce, and then Phil.
Just, I don't know if this answers any of the questions. The printing and binding budget for 11 is $222,000. Through January of 2010, we spent $13,600. Through January of 11, we spent $2,300. So we're 11,000 roughly under. I don't know what got spent last year that didn't get spent this year, but at the moment we're about $11,300 under what we spent last year. If that this early in the year makes any difference.
Phil?
I was going to make a motion.
Okay.
Okay. I move that the reappropriate, if that's the proper term, $18,500 from the printing and binding budget line to the Littleton calendar and annual report, and also that the sponsorship credits, instead of being in the open-ended budget, operating budget, I'm not sure exactly where they are now, but they actually credit to that same line item for the Littleton calendar and report.
Okay, so the second part of your motion is you want the money to show as income.
Against the expenses for the calendar.
Against expenses of the calendar, rather than just that being subtracted from the cost of the calendar.
No, it's my understanding from communication with Kelly earlier today is that the sponsorship fees get credited in another budget center and don't come actually back. She's, in her report here, she's estimating the amount, but it doesn't actually come back to the calendar.
But it reduces, I'm assuming by what you said in the memo, it reduces the price of the calendar. Well, hang on. All right. So is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Okay, good. Now we can discuss it. So that means that my assumption from your memo was that in 2010, for instance, the price was $19,511, but we only wrote a check for $15,311 because the printer then went off and collected the $4,200.
At the finance director's suggestion, we put it out in the bid that the printer would be responsible for invoicing the sponsors. And that's what we did. I don't think they liked that very well. I think they prefer to get one check than to have to go out and invoice 12 private businesses. And there was a hang-up with one of the businesses. I think that's going to really limit the number of people that will bid on the project because they don't want to mess with that.
Okay.
So you're right, this year it was an experiment.
Any other discussion? Jim?
When I was first reading this memo, before I got to the end of it, I was thinking that if the sponsors are paying $350 for a sponsorship of a month, and they're getting 350 calendars, that's $1 a piece. So if we sold calendars for $1 a piece, which may help with some of the, like Joe said, $75, a merchant come in, pay $75 and get 75 calendars they can distribute to their clients or their friends or their customers or whatever. Or any of us who are sending it to our friends and neighbors, we pay $1 a piece for them. You would get $15,000 equivalent for doing that. And that would come close to paying the full cost of this.
Again, you're going to have the money up front. There's no printer that's going to print this calendar on waiting till possibly February till we've collected all the money. My second question is where do you sell it besides the museum and the library?
It's awfully easy for somebody to walk into Wendy here at the front desk and hand them a $1 bill. She doesn't have to take any kind of, make any kind of change. She just had to have some kind of a cash box that would keep the money in and turn it into finance periodically throughout the day if necessary. But what was the first thing you said?
The money up front.
Oh, money. You take the money up front exactly where you're planning to take it now if this proposal goes forward, out of the print and binding budget to pay for it up front, and then reimburse back with the payment to $1 a piece on the calendars.
Council, I got to step in on this. You know, to just say it would be easy for Wendy, given the amount of transactions she does there. No, sir, I don't buy it. We've made our recommendation. If council wants to try a different way to do it, staff has given you our recommendation. We think it's real clunky. We think it'll just jam up the process around here. If 4 of you want to do it, we'll go try it. We don't recommend it.
Yeah. I think that charging for the annual report, because, I mean, it is included in there, just something that runs a little counter to me as far as that's concerned. And I know it's electronically available on the website. You can print it off in a PDF document if you would so choose. It's one of those traditions. We at least have a proposal in front of us of moving some money. So I kind of saw this as an opportunity to say, hey, let's take it up. It seems that the staff is considering this a reasonable approach. It gives us more than enough, and I think probably at some point in time, if there's extra money there that doesn't get used, Kelly might be nice enough to put it back in the printing and binding section.
Yeah, and I didn't realize there was this little accounting decision, but we'll get it straightened out.
Yeah.
Deb?
It's a no-brainer for me. I mean, this is part of the fiber of Littleton. It's clear that it is. It's unique. It's original. We get notoriety and great PR from it. It goes all over the country. It goes all over the state. Doesn't cost that much. It's a beautiful 4-color piece with an annual report and original photography. And, Kelly's found a budget that has some extra money, and we can pay for it out of that. I don't feel like charging citizens for it. I think we already do. Their money. Just a no-brainer for me. Just pass this. Make it happen.
First.
Phil, let me ask you just a clarification, and I apologize, I actually didn't see the memo until just a minute ago, but on the accounting issue, are you basically asking to make it a revenue line item in the printing budget, you're not suggesting netting the revenue against the cost on a single line item, are you?
It's just, right now, the revenue goes into, I'm going to say accounting has it kind of like general fund.
Well, it's both, it's all general fund, but it's miscellaneous revenue.
Right, it goes into miscellaneous revenue and doesn't get credited back against, other than Kelly's estimate of the 4,200.
But Kelly always knows where it is.
Well, which is fine. I just want to make sure.
I can't get to it.
I know that, but despite her irritation with the accountants, she knows where it is.
I guess I just want to make
So
sure.
in practical terms, we know how it nets out, even though Tiffany and Earlene won't let her actually put her hands physically on the money.
And that's, I understand what you're saying. I guess I just wanted to make sure we're not going to net the cost against the revenue so that we don't see the two component pieces, so we really
I don't think we want to do that.
Perfect, okay.
Any other discussion? All right, the motion is to move $18,500 from the printing and binding to cover the cost of the Littleton report and to create a line item in revenue to take in the sponsorship revenue. All in favor, raise your hands. Opposed? Passes on a 5-2 with Jim Taylor and Doug Clark voting against it.
Thank you, Council.
All right.
I do have a question now that we did that.
Yes.
What if the bids come in higher? I assume that would have to come back to us?
Yeah, we wouldn't have the budget authorization, so
Yeah.
that's what we'd have to do.
And when would we perhaps know that?
Well, what I would probably do, the bid specifies 15,000 copies, and typically we get more than that, because when things are run on a printing press, it's not exact, the machine doesn't start at 15,000, so often we get more than 15,000, maybe 15,500 or 16,000. What we do, when we do the bid documents, we ask for a bid amount to print 12,000 and a bid amount to print 15,000. So I've always had that in my back pocket, that if 15,000 came in too high, we'd go
Cut back the number.
and we'd produce 12,000 instead of 15.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Now we're going to spice things up. Right?
Council, I asked Suzanne to bring this to us tonight. I wanted to just kind of set the stage a bit on this. I've been working on some form of legislation regarding K2 Spice for about a year now. I started working with Joe Rice on it when I became aware of the substance and then became aware of its distribution in Littleton. Joe was very eager to help move something through the state on it. They were out of session at the time, and then hence had an election. Joe didn't get back in. So what I decided to do was to kind of take it more from a local level, take a run at it, and the state consequently is also looking at it. Suzanne's got information she'll share with us as she goes through her presentation. The prevalence of spice is, this may be the first time some of you have heard about it. Probably when the gentleman came down in council is the first time you may have heard about it. You're lucky. Spice is a toxic toxin. That is, it's a synthetic marijuana, and it's infiltrating the cities, it's infiltrating the schools. It's legal at this point in any state that hasn't made it illegal yet. And it doesn't have an age limit on who can buy it. It's been proven to be deadly. It's certainly not something that I think anybody would want to find in their kid's backpack. And it's pretty readily available throughout Littleton. And in fact, Littleton is, amongst some of the younger drug culture, is seen as a bit of a hub for SPICE and its friends, which Suzanne, again, has some more information on that. So I think my intention in bringing this is to educate everybody on what SPICE is, since it's something that's new to some of us, and to give everybody a clear idea of what it is we're dealing with. Today, very fortunate that Mary Hilco from the Rocky Mountain Poison Control Center is here to answer questions or talk about her experience in this regard. We are waiting for Lucinda Hundley. She's the LPS Student Services Director, and she has some information too and can answer some questions. Sergeant Cindy Mitchell's here. She's got a great deal of information on it and has done some research, and she's here to answer questions along with Chief Coogan. And Kay Wilmshire is here also with Littleton Youth Initiative. They have had this run across their meeting agendas and have looked at some of the issues related to it. So Suzanne's given us some alternatives, and when her presentation's done, we can ask some questions, get some more information. There's some choices that we can make today to move this forward, or to, in different levels, or to do nothing. So at this point, I just kind of wanted to give everybody a little bit of background on why it's landed here, and why, I wanted to get this information in your hands, because I frankly would like to see us have a zero tolerance for this in Littleton. Bruce?
They reference in here this Senate Bill 11134. Do you know the status of it?
I believe it's been introduced, and it's Senator Kopp's bill. And we did talk to CML about it, and they are monitoring the bill, and they don't believe there will be any opposition.
Okay.
So right now, it's classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. And if that passes, then the city would lose any jurisdiction over criminalizing it, because it would be a statewide felony to possess any quantity of it.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to Suzanne.
So as Councilmember Brinkman indicated, she had asked us to put together some basic information on synthetic marijuana, which is otherwise known as SPICE. And it was brought to our office early last fall by Cindy Mitchell with Littleton Police, discussing some of the things that she had seen in the city with regards to SPICE and what she believed was beginning to be the prevalence of it here. We knew at that time that there was some state legislation being proposed, and we hadn't seen a copy of it yet. Initially, I thought maybe the state would treat it like marijuana and we would continue to retain jurisdiction over it, so we kept monitoring the state legislation. But as Councilmember Stallman pointed out in the answer to his question, we will not have jurisdiction over it if it passes in the current form, because it would be a Schedule I controlled substance. Councilmember Brinkman then requested a meeting with us in early January, and we had police there again. At that time, we were aware of 3 local businesses that were selling SPICE. There were no age limits. Many of the businesses that were selling them were doing it in tandem with paraphernalia that they had on the shelves. We then researched the other jurisdictions in Colorado and determined at that time, in early January, there was no state, federal, or local ban in effect anywhere in Colorado. Looking outside Colorado, there were a number of cities and states that had already enacted a ban or were in the process of banning it. So Senate Bill 11134 then was introduced in the legislature, again classifying this as a Scheduled I. Last Thursday, March 3rd, the DEA put SPICE back on the list of prohibited drugs. That remains on their list under an emergency order for a period of 1 year. So it'll now be a violation of federal crime to possess SPICE. The reference to SPICE is actually a reference to the chemical compounds, and I have a really quick PowerPoint I was going to just run through with you. I'll run through it. I can see it.
It's frozen.
Okay, well, you all have one in your packet, so I'll just try to go through it in case there's anyone out in the audience that's watching. But what is SPICE is the first slide. Are you going to try to fix it for me? He's going to try to fix it. It's an olive-colored plant material laced with a synthetic cannabinoid, and we've listed what those specific drugs are. It's sold as an all-natural incense and was introduced in 2002 in Europe. I've given you the definition of what can qualify as a Schedule I controlled substance. It's any substance or a chemically substantially similar to an illegal drug intended for human consumption. On March 1st, again, the DEA issued an emergency order making the possession or sale of products containing any of the 5 popular chemical recipes for spice illegal for the next 12 months. And Colorado Senate Bill 11134 adds K2 spice as a synthetic cannabinoid, Schedule I. And again, listing the definition there. This is one of the problems that we have with enforcement of spice. There are no set standards to test. This is not the best microphone either. There are no set standards to test for substances that are in spice. It does not show up on a standard urinalysis. Spice costs about $30 to $35 per gram. Each bag of spice could contain a different mix of the chemical substances. And a lot of times the packets of spice do not list the actual synthetic substances. I think I'll like this better. Just a couple additional facts. They are seeing spice come in as other controlled substances. 100 pounds of it were seized in January in Dayton, Ohio, from a shipment bound for Florida. It's reported to contain numerous cannabinoid-type substances, and the effects of using spice are similar to marijuana or the chemical THC. The abbreviated chemical names found in spice, we've just listed those. Common brand names are Silver Spice, Diamond Spice, Yucatan Fire Spice, Pep Spice, Fire and Ice. The next video...
Hey, Suzanne, just a quick question. In Cindy's report, she listed 6 items, of which 5 are showing up there, but they're a little bit different. So how long is the list?
Well, I've seen states with a list as long as 30. And it depends how many of the different synthetic mixes they try to put in there. What a lot of states and what Colorado's has done is legislate these in any, they word it as any similar compound. And so by doing that, they try to take in all the other related types of chemical compounds. Just showing you the packets on the next slide. That's actually the only reason I put together a PowerPoint, was to show you the photos. This is what it's marketed as. This is a Spice Diamond brand. You see it in the little foil package, probably costing between $30 to $35 for that package. It looks a lot like marijuana. Here are other examples of spice that we've seen on the shelves. The symptoms, users of spice, again, symptoms much like marijuana, being paranoid, slurred speech, appearing high, having difficulty keeping balance. Users report feeling lightheaded, drowsy, and happy. It can last approximately 3 to 5 hours. Like I said, this was first introduced in Europe back in 2002, and so we don't have a lot of data in the United States, but German reports indicate it may have adverse effects on the heart, circulation, and nervous system. There are no long-term studies of spice. When we started doing our research, I talked to Mary Hilco, who's here tonight from Poison Control, about what kinds of numbers they'd been seeing on spice. And I think the numbers she gave me for 2010, and I know she's run some new numbers to come here tonight, but the 2010 numbers indicated, I want to say around 44 calls. And I think of greatest concern, at least a third of those calls were juveniles, and some of them were 12 and under when we looked at the ages. And so from poison control standpoint, they have seen a proliferation as spices become more popular and more common. And we have also asked Mary if she could run the numbers, and we have a little bit about this in the packet on this new synthetic cocaine that's being marketed under the name bath salt. Again, no legislation on this in Colorado. There's no state ban. There have been no local bans. There are bans in other states of bath salt, and it's actually being marketed as a synthetic cocaine, mimicking the effects of cocaine and heroin. So this synthetic drug, it appears that it's trending toward this, where drugs are becoming illegal, and then states take on spice, then a new synthetic drug is popping up that can be more dangerous in its new form. And so I brought that up just to kind of show council that, beyond just the spice issue, I think there is a policy decision that could be made regarding how do you want to treat this trend of synthetic drugs. Do you want us to monitor them? Do you want us to bring them to your attention when we see them coming out on the streets? Because as they come through in their synthetic form with no legislation that's banning them, we see them pop up at these places around town, and there's no limit on age, there's no restriction on quantity, there's no restriction on use. Now, in Littleton Public Schools, and I don't know if she came. Okay. And here she is. I know in talking with Scott Murphy that, and maybe you can come up and address this, but I know Scott said that, Littleton Public Schools has a zero tolerance policy, and so they have treated spice as a drug that they have zero tolerance, and I'm not sure, where that stands, but he had indicated there had been a number of incidents at the schools.
I thought I'd bring you some. That's why I ran to the car.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it might be of interest if you haven't seen it and you can see what it looks like and what it smells like. This is one that we confiscated off a student in one of our high schools who smoked it in this pipe. And this particular student was found to be in possession and under the influence. I brought you our drug and alcohol policy in case you're interested in it, because we're taking a little bit of liberty in how we're interpreting it, but we feel like we really don't have any choice. It refers to the definition of a controlled substance. Part of the definition includes a mind-altering drug. And the position we've taken, and discipline is under my area of responsibility, but the position we've taken is that students who are using spice, and incidentally, the other thing we're seeing is snorting bath salts that have been crushed into a powder. It is a mind-altering drug, and they are coming under the influence of something that they're clearly not their typical selves. And we're seeing it as something that we aren't quite sure what the danger is, but we are concerned about it. And it is not bringing any kind of behavior that's conducive to learning. And so we decided to go ahead and treat this as a mind-altering substance. This was before the DEA made their temporary ruling in early March. But it's been something that we are looking at seriously, and we are treating it as the same way we would treat any student who is in possession or under the influence of drugs. We have a sort of a two strikes policy in Littleton. You are under the influence or in possession the first time, you're suspended for up to 10 days. You can bring those days down by going to a drug or alcohol education program. You're under a second offense for under the influence or possession, and you are expelled. Within a 3-year, if you're under possession, if you have possession or under the influence within a three-year window of the first offense, you are expelled. We have a practice in Littleton called deferred expulsion, and one of the things we're doing is we don't expel kids for a full year, although we could. We expel them for some period of time, never less than 6 weeks, and we'll write a deferred expulsion contract, and in cases of drug or alcohol abuse, it'll be with the understanding that they undergo some kind of a treatment program, random urinalysis at the parent's expense, various evidence that the child or student is no longer using or distributing or possessing. So,
Lucien, is this, what you're describing is for a student on campus, or is it if you become aware of a student off campus?
There has to be a nexus with school. It could be off campus, but it has to be a school-related activity.
Okay.
Though if it is off campus during the school day, between the beginning of school or the ending of their school day, we will find a nexus with school because they're on our watch. And even if it's off campus, we will invoke a discipline consequence.
And do you get any information from the students about where they receive it?
Never.
Never, okay.
It's very hard to
Right.
get them to talk about who their suppliers are.
I mean, I guess one of the things, maybe PD wants to talk about this, but I think the feeling was having it available readily in town was probably the key factor to kids in this area using it. And maybe it wasn't something they'd be willing to drive. And some of them can't drive. I mean, you've seen this in the middle schools and among the younger kids. And so I think part of the concern was by allowing it to be sold here, it's more easily within their hands.
I'm not sure I can speak to that. The experience we've had with this with students has been predominantly at the high school level.
And then, Mary, I know you had brought the numbers with you tonight, just on new. If you could come up and just talk a little bit about what you've seen at poison control.
Listen, just stay there a second while she's walking up. If they don't have that in their possession, how do you, well, even if they do, how do you know they're under the influence? Because the list of symptoms that it shows here could be caused by something legal.
In the cases we've had, we have had an administrator question the student, and in each case they've admitted. And interestingly enough, as we've stressed health risks to parents, we've had parents not push back. Some, I wish we were a little more concerned than they've expressed to us, but we have had parents cooperate with us.
Thank you.
It's obvious to me that, just listening to what I've heard here, the number of calls that we're receiving at the Poison Center nowhere indicates the rate of use of this. That said, with the K2 or the spice, in 2010, we had a total of 44 cases that came into our call center. Many of those originated from healthcare facilities. In other words, a physician in an emergency room receives a patient, and then they get the history, and they do admit to using K2 or spice. They're calling because, obviously, because it's relatively new on the scene, physicians in emergency rooms are not aware of it, the potential effects, what are we going to do to treat it? So we get the call. I mean, it's just really surprising what you shared to me, you know. I can see why they don't call us if they're not having very many symptoms or symptoms of concern, because I think they view us as perhaps a reporting agency. They're not aware of the fact that we are, you know, we're HIPAA, per our HIPAA requirements, we cannot report them. You know, we certainly would refer them into an emergency room if they were calling us from their home or even their friend's home and they had symptoms. That said, I think that might be the explanation as to why we don't get as many calls as what I'm getting the impression you have experience with. And so far this year on the Spice K2, we've had just 8 cases called into us in, what is it, 2+ months. So that, and who knows what the year will bring. I mean, if we had a total of 44 in 2010, do the math, we might have a little more activity going on right now. That said, with the DEA classifying it for a year, who knows, maybe that'll help us a little bit. As far as the symptoms that were reported of the cases that we did get calls on, the number one symptom was increase in heart rate. And number 2 was probably agitation, and number 3 was confusion. And then we had a few here and there of other things like nausea and drowsiness, things like that. So what I'm thinking is what we're seeing nowhere represents the actual use of this substance. And there's not a whole lot we can do to encourage calls, obviously. And I think it's the nature of the demographic that's using it. And, you know, across the country, I guess perhaps there are other poison centers in other parts of the country that are actually getting a lot more calls. Louisiana is amazing. They've had the most calls, I think, in the country. And I believe they've banned it in that state. But it's definitely a threat to public health, a nuisance, and I guess, you know, other than legislation, we can't really control it outside of that, as you can't control anything that's bought on the street or in the internet, and it seems like we always get another threat coming down the road, as you mentioned, bath salts.
Can I ask you guys, there was something in here that somebody was speculating this stuff was being imported, or at least the chemical compound was being imported. Is there any, I mean, this is a fairly sophisticated marketing, packaging kind of arrangement, and that little thing Lucinda had was, container obviously has some marketing. Somebody's got to be doing something from a product development, I mean, it's what it is, product development perspective. So who's doing it? Who's manufacturing or distributing?
It's probably a lot of different sources. Initially, it was, the chemical itself was formulated in a lab at Clemson University by Dr. John Huffman, who was doing research on the effects of marijuana-type products on animals. This is sort of like the story about the poison that got out of the lab, you know. And then it ended up over in Europe first, and then they had that predominance of exposures, and then I believe in about 2009 or 2008 we started getting it here. Recently I read, and it was just a news article about an entrepreneurial type fella in California who had been a trash collector. He had a chemistry background. He decided, you know, this was a good revenue stream for him. He created his own little mix of spice, and he marketed it. He's making millions of dollars. And he has a home shop, and I think he had 18 to 20 employees in his own home manufacturing this. So anyone that has a background or a knowledge of chemistry,
Pretty easy to
they
make.
could probably figure out how to make it. And they're making their own little recipe, so to speak. And that said, we don't know long term what will be the effect on these folks' lungs, their central nervous system. And we don't know that. We just don't know down the road, you know. And that's true, of course, of anything folks choose to buy on the street. You never know what the contaminants are in it.
But the takeaway from all that is that the ability to make this stuff for someone who has a skill set in chemistry is fairly ubiquitous. So it's not, so you have to orient towards the user, not the manufacturer, in terms of prohibiting the substance from getting out into the public. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, my understanding is that not only would it would be illegal for the user, but anyone found in possession of any of the chemicals used to make the substance, they would be in violation of the law, and that would be a felony. Is that everybody else's your understanding about that?
Of the federal ban.
Yeah, the federal one.
Okay.
And so, but again, it would be difficult to target unless a student would give up their source, right? And then you go back. They should go back.
Well, we heard one of the gas stations, you know, is selling it up the street.
And I had heard, I had a call from Fort Collins, and there was it was actually a drug rehab home, residential facility, and apparently a little stop-and-go or something type store across the street had that on the shelves, and these kids are supposedly in a rehab program are going across the street and purchasing this up there. And, you know, all these numbers that we have, that probably doesn't even, it's probably not even an accurate number that we're seeing that we know about, I suspect.
Your expertise is related to health, but I'm assuming that you would also be in a position to say that this is also directly or indirectly a safety issue, because people under the influence of these then would drive or do other things that might.
Absolutely. And that's the worry and the concern, the secondary effects of it. Actually, there's been more reported regarding the bath salts as far as the secondary influences. That seems to have more dramatic effects, health effects, whereas they're reporting delusions, paranoid behavior, agitation. Some of them are imagining they're being chased. I've heard from different areas of the country there have been folks that have, young folks, that have actually, one ran out in traffic, you know, and he was hit and killed. And then there was another, he was a physician, his son was paranoid, and he kept calling his dad, and he ended up committing suicide. So, you know, the bath salts, while we haven't had as many calls on those exposures, that to me sounds like a much more serious drug that's become available. And just for your information, I checked, and last year we had no calls on bath salts. We've just had 3 so far this year. But still, that is really one nasty chemical. It's actually a hallucinogenic amphetamine. So amphetamines cause you to get agitated. It increases your heart rate, your central nervous system, all the symptoms like that, your blood pressure, and then, of course, obviously hallucinogenic explains why these individuals are getting the effects of thinking someone's chasing them. There was a story where one young woman thought she had a weapon, and she thought her mother was someone other than her mother and threatening her. So, you know, these are the secondary side effects, basically. You know, not just a health effect, but, you know, the collateral damage, so to speak, of these people out there and under the influence.
Thank you. Suzanne? Since it's classified by the DEA, that makes it a federal law, federal violation?
Right now it does, because it's on their emergency order list.
But we don't enforce federal law, or the feds don't allow us to enforce it.
Well, we have a provision in our code that prohibits a business from selling a product that would be in violation of state or federal or local law. So we can enforce it through a sales tax license by doing a revocation hearing on a sales tax license. If we were to find a business that were still selling the product, we cannot enforce, nor do I believe our police have any jurisdiction to go out and enforce the federal law. So we couldn't deal with the possession side of it. We could only deal with a business that we found out was selling it.
So we have the mechanism right now to stop the 3 businesses that are selling it as of March, whatever that was, last week.
Right, and I don't know if we've been out again, and we don't want to advertise the businesses, but certainly PD had been out to the initial 3. I had even been out to one of them, and it was real prevalent on the shelf. You know, they were happy to help you pack your pipe. You know,
Can we kind of get to that a little bit? Because I guess I wanted to have, in your memo, you talked about some of the enforcement issues and the fact that right now, and then in Cindy, Sergeant Mitchell's, she talks about that in fact, as far as testing, there's really no testing facilities right now in the state of Colorado. I don't know if we're actually sending, if some of the agencies if somebody's actually passed the ban in Colorado and is sending it out of state. But it seems like if the council wants to move ahead with something that, and I don't know, you talk about here, there's been a court case in Minnesota where it went in front of a federal judge. You talked about a couple of the other states that have passed it, but I'm assuming that any kind of legal precedent is probably very, very fresh yet. Do we have any kind of sense of that? And I guess just talking about the practical side of, you know, what's the cop on the street do? I mean, do they go in and do they have somebody test it? You know, I'm just making this up, but you go to the whatever the little corner store and they say, well, this looks like this stuff, and they say, well, no, it's not, and you say, well, give it to me, and then he calls my lawyer, and then what does it do? We send it out of state to a lab, and they come back and say, yeah, this is it, and then we've cited the person into Muni court, and then that's how we prove it. I mean, talk a little bit about that and what may be happening out there just in terms of enforcement.
In terms of the possession of it, you're correct. The research that I did, I found that there is very limited ability to test for this in Colorado at the moment. And the reason that was given to me by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation is that they operate off of standards. So if they get something in, they compare it with a standard that they have in-house, and then they can state it is or is not that substance. They are required to get those standards from the DEA. And when I talked to her back in January, there was only one of them that she had a standard for at that time, outside of the HU 210, which had already been determined to be a controlled substance. As far as I know, that is still the case. However, they said that they do get new standards from DEA on a pretty regular basis, and once they receive those standards, they would then have the ability to test for those other substances.
So do we know in terms of just enforcement, I think, ma'am, I'm sorry, I don't remember the Center for Disease Control. Can you just repeat your name for the TV?
Mary Hilco.
Mary, thank you, Mary. Did you mention that you thought Louisiana had banned it?
I believe they have.
Does anybody know of enforcement? Are the police departments and judges kind of making it up as they go along and doing their best they can, or you mentioned the Minnesota case where there's already the guy claims from business owners that he's going to contest it, but do we have any kind of track record from the law enforcement community?
I don't have any specific information.
And Jim, part of that may be the ordinances I looked at talked about it being what they call prima facie evidence, which means you then have to rebut it if it's packaged that way.
Okay.
So just like alcohol, we don't test alcohol. We assume the label is what it is.
If it's got Jack Daniels on it, it's just a prima facie.
And it says 12%, then
Okay.
the judge takes it at that, and then if the defense wants to say, no, that's not true, and I want to test and whatever, then it becomes the burden on them.
So if it says it's Spice Gold or Yucatan Fire.
Right, or it
but
has any of the
But if it
chemicals.
doesn't say on it that it's got tetradonocannabolus CIS something on the label, does the cop just say, I got you, here's your citation, go tell it to the judge?
Basically, looks like it to me.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, Sergeant Mitchell, do you have any other comments on enforcement?
The only thing I would say is in the experience, that limited experience I have with this in the city is that the packaging specifically says it does not contain these things, and it's not for human consumption.
So they deny it right up front?
Yes.
Okay.
So, based on what Jim was saying, theoretically, who are you citing? The store owner or somebody, not somebody in possession, because you were saying we can't really do that.
Well, we can't, now that it's on the DEA, we lose local control over it.
Right.
And we can't if the state legislates it. So at this point, yes, we'd be citing the store.
All right,
And then-
and so how many, so say somebody's got a rack of 24 packages of spice, are you writing one citation or 24?
Currently, we can't write any citations because it's a federal law.
So what we would do, and what we had planned to do, is actually through community development. I don't know if Dennis is still around here, but they would actually go out and write it as a violation of licensing code.
So you're threatening them with revocation of the sales tax license. And what's the timeline on that?
Well, we'll go out and check the stores again. We've actually been to one of them recently, and they have it off the shelves now. So we'll go back and check the other two, and if they have it on the shelves, we'll give them 24 hours to remove it. And if they don't, then we'll cite them for selling in violation of federal law.
All right, and it's a pretty quick turn on how fast they have to basically comply.
Yeah, I mean, you got to give them 24 hours because most of the time you're not talking to the manager.
Right.
And
If memory serves on marijuana dispensaries, we talked about paraphernalia as well, or there's an ordinance, we dealt with some ordinance not that long ago that involved paraphernalia. Is that part and parcel of this whole thing?
well, usually we found that it has been sold with paraphernalia, and there's been some law enforcement reasons that we didn't go ahead and enforce the paraphernalia side of it at the time. But the one we went back to had also removed the paraphernalia, but paraphernalia is already illegal.
Okay, all right, good. But what happens if it's off the shelves, but are we going to do undercover to make sure somebody's not selling it, out the back door?
We could do that. It's still going to be out there, whether it's sold in Littleton or not. Like she said, it's out there, and like she said, it's out there. I have run across it 2 more times in the last week. One from a driving perspective, had a gentleman that was driving a vehicle. He didn't buy it in the city. He bought it up in, one place was Denver and another was Englewood. So we arrested him for driving under the influence of drugs.
But I mean, the more word gets out that you guys are working over people to make sure that it's not being sold here, you're always going to get that. I mean, at some level, as long as it's not outlawed in the state, but I guess it sounds like we've got at least some tools to be able to push back on the distribution pipeline as far as the city is concerned.
And I do meet with surrounding agencies, and they're pretty much taking the same stance of, we will notify them that it's a federal violation now. We can't enforce, but we will notify them of that.
Jim?
I sometimes have problems with trying to oversimplify things, I guess, but it looks to me like this is just a problem like the computer geeks do. They create a virus, the companies do a fix for it, a new virus is created, a new fix is required, and a new virus and a new fix is just ongoing. Does the DEA regulations cover this creation of all of these slight change in a chemical compound that will do the same sort of thing, but is not covered under the specific law? And if we can do that, can we copy then what the DEA has determined to do and put it into our local code?
Well, I mean, to some extent, the DEA will try to cover it, but if it's a new chemical compound and they didn't know about it, it takes them a while. I mean, they've known about spice for 2 years.
So you're saying the DEA regulations have all these compounds listed, and if it's not listed, then you can't do it?
Right, and right now, bath salt's not even on the DEA list. And, as we've heard tonight, it's probably a lot more dangerous of a drug than the spice.
I'm just afraid that whatever we do, somebody's going to come and make a very slight change in one of those little sub-numbers of a chemical compound, and it's going to give you even a worse, or maybe not quite as bad, of a reaction, but we're not regulating it. I see that as a no-win situation.
And that's really, I guess, one of the policy issues is that if you enact an ordinance and you ban the sale or the possession or both, you have to be prepared that you're going to be going back into that ordinance. I mean, I believe if the trend continues, you're going to be going back in there, you're going to be taking drugs out as they become illegal in the federal or the state, and you're going to be putting them in as they're not addressed in the federal or the state. So I think as a council, you have to decide, is that something that you want to take on, or do you just want to monitor what the state and the feds are doing about these products? Because I mean, obviously different cities around the country are handling it lots of different ways. There are many cities that have already gone out and banned the bath salt and are waiting for their states to take action, and then they'll repeal their ordinances. But, it's a policy decision whether you want to get into that business or not.
What would be inappropriate with doing it broadly, which is very much what LPS has done here when they talk about a controlled substance includes but not limited, controlled substances include but are not limited to narcotic drugs, hallucinogenic or mind-altering drugs, or substances, amphetamines, barbiturates, stimulants, depressants, marijuana, or any other controlled substances defined in law or prescription or non-prescription, so forth and so on. I mean, yeah, it's an infinite number of permutations that there's no way you can write ordinances for, but if you describe it broadly.
Because at LPS, it's the fact that you ingested it. So let's say bath salt, I think poison control can tell you this. There are many products that are out there that have a use, like Desitin, and there's a completely legal use.
I understand.
But ingest it and now it's poison. So to ban something in that kind of broad scope, are you banning it for the purpose of ingesting it? Because how does a business know what the person's intending to do with it? It becomes very difficult to get into that without banning just the person who happens to be intoxicated with it, and then you come back to the testing problem. I mean, in theory, it would be so much easier to regulate it from the sales side. Businesses, you can't sell X product and maintain your license in Littleton. But how do you define X product? You can't define it that way because there are so many products that have legitimate use. It's just that when you ingest them, now they become something else.
But if I understand the situation that we're in right now, as of last week, we have the ability to go into the 3 entities that are selling this and tell them that if they continue to sell it, we're going to take away their sales tax license.
Right.
And the likelihood of them continuing to sell it in that circumstance is pretty remote.
At least over the counter.
Well, you have that with anything.
Oh,
the state is probably going to pass a bill which will go into effect the 1st of July, which is, and given that we have to go through a first and second reading and the time frame, that's 2.5 months from the soonest that we can enact something anyway. It'll be taken care of by the state, which removes it from our jurisdiction. So if we attempt to do something, it would have a maximum lifespan of 2.5 months.
Right.
So the sale part is something we can do right now. The possession is something the state will take care of in 2.5 months from us. So do we really want to spend any more time on this? Peggy?
Well, that's this one, 2.5 months for this one. Then the legislature's not in session, and if something else comes along, it'll probably be July a year from now before we could deal with that one. As much as I don't particularly like removing things, adding things, etc., I think we really need to be on top of this in a more rigorous way. I don't particularly want to see anybody dying out of stupidity of using these drugs or harming somebody else because they're become warped in the brain while they're on it, or driving erratically and killing somebody. So it seems to me that if we develop the right kind of ordinance, that it would be easy to add, subtract, do whatever in some way. But I do have a question. Is there any way, if somebody is selling something like this that they're not licensed to sell, is it possible to have an ordinance that would just shut them down?
Well, we do. But what we have is you can take that ordinance 2 different tracks. It says you cannot sell it. So in any ordinance that we have, if you are not following the ordinance, you can go to municipal court. This one has an extra remedy in there, which is that the director of revenue, who is the director of finance in this city, can revoke that license after a hearing. So we would probably go both tracks, write the person into municipal court for the crime of it, and then track them into a revocation hearing before the director of finance. And we've talked to him about that and about having a hearing officer and that sort of thing. And that is a 10-day process to the time their license is revoked. Now, if they continue to sell without a license, then every day that they're open continues to be a violation, they're written into municipal court, and you end up in a...
So we could act somewhat expeditiously. It wouldn't be months and months. If somebody is selling something that they had no business selling.
Right. We could do that tomorrow because there is a federal ban now.
Okay.
All right, is there somebody who wants to make a motion?
I have a question for Suzanne. The state, it looks pretty clear. I mean, at this point, the state's not seeing a lot of kickback. So at that point, that allows us, that we step out of that, and they are in charge of enforcing it. I mean, we can enforce it, our police can enforce it.
Our police can enforce it, we just can't write it in local code.
Okay.
Let me just, one real quick question here. But I'm not seeing, it doesn't sound like it's an either or. I mean, I guess I don't understand if because it's been added, the DEA has added it,
Yeah.
and we could go out tomorrow and say, you can't sell this,
Right.
or we're going to yank you in on your sales tax license.
Right.
Why couldn't we just do that irrespective of what the state does?
We
I mean,
could.
I don't know, I mean, you see what I'm saying? To get into the enforcement side of it, it seems to me you're still going to get into the, whether it has Hydrog, Mexel, -6, something, and I don't know where all that's going to go with testing and so forth, but why couldn't we do both? I mean, why couldn't we go ahead and just, tomorrow?
Well, we can stop the sale tomorrow. We can go out tomorrow and
Yeah,
stop.
and then whatever the state does, I mean, if it adds to it, because I think then there's going to have to be some sort of testing standards. I don't know what they would do, in terms of
What
the
I'm
lab and that kind of stuff.
looking at is that, I mean, yeah, I think the fact that we can go ahead and do that tomorrow is great. But I'm also thinking, just as hypothetical questioning, so we go to the 3 and we make that happen. And, then they start popping up. And so we just keep chasing them around like that. At what point do we have a bigger hammer? And is that at the point when the state makes it illegal and they make it illegal, we get a bigger hammer, they start creating other things, the drug freaks that are making this stuff start making other things. Does the state hammer help us on those?
The state hammer only helps us when the state identifies it and regulates it. So the state hammer will help us on spice come July 1st, because then that business that popped up will not only get the ticket for, we won't even mess with them in municipal court. They'll get a felony ticket for possessing it, and that'll be the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still no regulation on bath salt. So what is our hammer on bath salt? Our only hammer would be if we legislated it here at the local level. And then, some of the things that I've issued that are problems with that is you're going to have, again, enforcement difficulties. I think you're going to have an inappropriate level of the punishment. There's going to be no graduation of penalties. So, in the state code, you see you possess a gram, it's a class 6. You possess a pound, your intent to distribute. And the penalties go up depending on how much you have. In municipal code, it's not going to make any difference whether it's the kid at the high school or whether it's a distributor. It's going to be the same ticket.
But I think we're having a misconception here about how big the hammer is. If we go out and take action against their sales tax license, we put them out of business. So that gas station ceases to exist. That's a pretty big hammer. If you're talking the possession, then that's going to be handled by the state in 2.5 months. If we're concerned that the state statute, the proposed bill, doesn't include all the substances we wanted to include, then the easiest way, probably the fastest way of handling that is call Mike Kopp up and tell him, please add bath salts. I can't imagine that he would have a serious objection to that if they're starting down the path of doing these synthetic things. And we know that that's an issue, and that is an issue in the community. And the fastest way is just have them add it on. because that's a pretty trivial thing. It's going to take effect on the 1st of July, and then that becomes a state-regulated substance that we can then also use as a way to take away their sales tax license if they continue to sell it. So we have the ability to stop the sale of it, and we will have the ability to enforce the possession if we choose to do so. All of this is going to be taken care of in 2.5 months.
Okay, I'll make a motion.
Okay?
I make a motion that we authorize staff to immediately enforce, okay, I'm going to need help on this one.
How about that you direct staff to stop the sale of spice-related stuff in the city limits?
Make a motion to immediately direct staff to immediately stop the sale of synthetic marijuana within the city limits, and synthetic marijuana and bath salts within the city limits of Littleton.
Second.
Okay, and moved and seconded. Direct the staff to stop the sale of synthetic marijuana and bath salts. Discussion.
I'm interpreting that, and I'll defer to the motion, that would include synthetic cocaine, synthetic heroin, as well as synthetic cannabinoids.
And I think that's the intent under the generic bath salts. Am I right, Suzanne?
Well, it is, but bath salts aren't illegal anywhere, so we don't have any ability to go in and tell them take it off the shelf.
Okay, so we really don't have a hammer there.
We don't have anything on bath salt.
Okay. So the only hammer we really have is over the...
We'd have to regulate bath salt in a local
Okay, so
ordinance.
that's a miss, I think that's a...
However,
understand.
I think the
Well, the
second
bath
part is...
salts, they're not, in my understanding on the bath salts, it's not the bath salts you can go to Target and buy right now. They're calling them bath salts, but it's synthetic cocaine.
Well, it is, but the DEA has only labeled it as a drug of concern.
But once again, probably the best way of handling this is to call up Mike Cobb, ask him to add it to the bill. It gets put on the bill, and then the 1st of July, when it goes into effect, that becomes a state-controlled substance, which then would make them in violation of their sales tax license, and we go back to them.
But if it's in ours that says is there something wrong with it being in our motion?
Well, you can put it in the motion.
It is
in the
going to be able
motion.
to do it 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I think that's what the clarification...
We can do synthetic marijuana at 8 o'clock, well, provided they're open.
Right.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
The tomorrow morning plan of action, council needs to understand, will not include the bath salts.
We can do bath salt, but only if we bring an ordinance.
Yes, ma'am, so that's not tomorrow morning.
All right.
In addition to Mike Cobb, the co-sponsors are Carol Murray out of Castle Rock, as well as Ed Vigil, who's out of Garland.
Yeah.
And then our CML lobbyist is Kevin Bomber on that.
Yeah, I think the thing to do is get in touch with all of them. Jim?
Debbie, is it the intent of your motion to direct staff to enforce the DEA regulations, but then just add bath salts to it for local ordinance to be coming back to us? Is that the intent of your motion?
Well, the intent is to have community development or go out and say, we revoke your sales tax license if you don't get this off your shelf immediately with the 24-hour. I added bath salts, which if that's going to snag this up, then we'll remove it.
Well, I guess my question is bothering me is that we already have the ability to go out and enforce what DEA has said is illegal. So why do we do anything other than just request an ordinance come back on bath salts?
Because you don't know if DEA is ever going to do anything with bath salts. I mean, what I'm understanding, Suzanne, I don't know if you have in mind a bath salt ordinance that would say,
That's not her motion. Her motion, Debbie accidentally included bath salts in the motion.
but I thought that's, Jim was asking clarification on that.
He is, and what Debbie said was that the intent of the motion was just to get the staff to go out tomorrow morning and enforce an action against the sales tax. The only thing they can enforce tomorrow morning is the spice.
The DEA.
Which is because of the DEA. So you can't go out tomorrow morning and do anything if they're selling bath salts.
But they already have that ability to do that. I think that's
No, Jim.
No, they don't.
They don't. That's what Suzanne was clarifying.
They have the ability to do that for the spice. They
Because
don't
it's
have-
only-
Exactly.
But they don't have the ability to do that for the bath salts.
I understand that. So why do we have to have a motion that's going
Oh, I see
to
what
go
you-
out and do what the DEA has already allowed us to do tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock?
Okay. I think it's
We just need
I
to
think
do
it's
the bath
just
salts.
direction. Yeah, I understand what he's saying.
Yes.
There's a technicality that if we, why do you need a motion if we can just go out there tomorrow and
Because
do it
Debbie
anyway?
wants to instruct the staff to go
Yeah,
out and do it.
I think it's just a consensus to the
If we don't
council's
need
all
a
on
motion, we
board.
don't need a motion. I want them to do it, though.
Yeah.
You're too
I mean, are
late.
they just going to do it? They're just
Yeah.
going to do it because we just had a conversation tonight?
You can withdraw your
That
motion.
happens sometimes.
No, she can't.
Yes, you can.
She can withdraw it only with our permission. Once the motion's been made and been seconded, it
Yeah,
belongs
but
to the body.
She can ask
So
for that, right.
She
So
can
go
ask
ahead
for it,
and
but we have to
ask
vote to do it.
Go.
Well, she can ask for it.
All right. Any other discussion on the motion?
What is the motion?
The motion
That's a good question.
is, the motion is to direct the staff to immediately go out to whoever's selling synthetic spice and notify them that they need to stop doing that. I'm sorry, the motion is to immediately instruct the staff to go out and notify people that are selling synthetic spice and bath salts to stop doing it.
I may drive by there tonight.
The staff, if this passes, the staff will go out tomorrow morning and hit the places that are selling the synthetic marijuana, but they won't hit any place that's selling bath salts because they can't.
In which case, we're silly to tell them to do it.
I'll amend the motion to remove bath salts.
Okay, good, thank you. I'll second that. All in favor of removing bath salts, raise your hands. All right, 7-0, good, that gets rid of that discussion. Now, the amended motion is to instruct the staff to go off and contact everybody tomorrow morning that's selling synthetic spice. Any other discussion?
And I do have a question then.
Yes, ma'am.
So we know some places that are selling it?
Yes?
That are, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yes.
And do we know
Mr. Swain
that...
says that's an affirmative.
Yes, and do we know all the places that might be selling it that we haven't checked?
PD's checked around, and they have gotten reports, and we believe there were 3.
Any more pops up, the Snoopy cops always find them.
Well, but if they're going out tomorrow to do it, and then the next day more do, is our
Whack-a-mole.
motion covering that?
Yeah,
Yes.
keep going.
You can cover it.
Well, I don't hear it in that motion, but anyway.
No, you said you didn't, it just didn't limit, Debbie didn't limit it to the 3. She said to enforce to ban
To
it.
go out tomorrow morning, so...
Immediately.
Yeah.
Your motion
Right.
says immediately.
So if we hear of some others, if we know there's 3, we go after those. If we hear of a 4th, 5th, 6th, we can just continue to pursue.
I mean, in my head is, if it, starting tomorrow morning to do such and such, that's continuing, as opposed to tomorrow morning. I mean, that's a legal
We'll be
issue,
diligent.
but,
Okay, any other discussion? Council ready to vote?
This is on the removal, or is this on the main, after?
This is the main one. This is
Okay.
the amended motion that says that we will instruct the staff to immediately go out tomorrow morning and stop the sale of synthetic marijuana. All in favor, raise your hands. Opposed?
I think it's superfluous legislation.
Okay. It's 6-1 with
yeah.
Jim Taylor voting against. Yes, ma'am.
Then I would like, I move that staff bring us an ordinance banning synthetic drugs as they come on the market, in the sense that we would be adding and subtracting as we follow up with that.
Second.
Motion is to bring an ordinance banning synthetic drugs.
Isn't, well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
As they come on the market.
And I should have asked for clarification. It's not all synthetic drugs, it's synthetic illegal drugs, is that right? Only that doesn't make sense either. But the point is, it's not going to be synthetic aspirin, right? Do we understand the...
Well, that's
When it
part
say
of
drugs of abuse,
that's part of the
drugs of abuse, is that a term that you would want to use?
Well, I mean, I think as a practical matter, we'd start with bath salt because we know about it, and then as new ones come on, we would bring them to council for your consideration to amend. And if bath salt becomes illegal at the state, we'd bring that to you to repeal. So,
or other variations of things before they hit higher level.
right, we would bring them to you as we become as we know that they are being abused.
And can...
Bruce? Okay, but going back to your point, though, the ordinance would have to have elements of sale, possession, quantity, intent to distribute. Is that...
Well, it won't.
So what will it have?
It can have sale, possession, or both.
So that's what you're looking for? Just sale and possession without any, it's binary, it's either on or off?
Is that what you'd be recommending to us? That's what I thought.
Yeah, either pick ban sale and possession or just sale.
Okay.
Further discussion?
I guess on this one, I would like to hear what's the cost that's going to be incurred around trying to monitor all of these. Jim has brought up the point, and one of the things that I do is I hire out virus software that does with the updates, and I pay a fee for that that's not particularly small. Trying to stay on the top of these. Not that I'm against some of the intent and the spirit, but what's our cost to take on this task?
Well, the way our city attorney just phrased it was as they become aware of them, which doesn't necessarily mean actively monitoring, but passively becoming aware. But the buzz around all this stuff is pretty big. I mean, I remember reading about the bath salts and something or other last fall. And I don't read risque things. So I'm thinking that what we're wanting to be is responsive as we become aware rather than waiting for big problems to occur.
Well, and
I don't know what the answer is, what Peggy's proposing at this point. I don't know if it's the perfect answer, but what I do know is that this stuff isn't going to stop coming. I think it's clear that spice, it moved in from out of the country. It came in to the United States. Now it's sitting here in 3 shops in Littleton. And it takes a number of years for that to happen. Whether things start moving faster and coming quicker, whether things start becoming, like the meth houses, they start cooking them in our neighborhoods. I don't know. The one thing that seems to be clear is that for whatever reason, the predominance of drugs that are mind-altering is growing and growing and growing, and what's becoming more and more frightening is that when these are being sold at the same place that you can buy a Diet Coke and a bag of sunflower seeds, and nobody cares how old you are, and nobody cares that you don't have the equipment to use it because they sell that too. And nobody cares that you don't really know how to use it because they'll show you how to use it before you leave the store. It seems to me that sending a pretty loud signal to the community that it's not going to be tolerated within Littleton is what we can do right now. And if that means that we set up a system of monitoring this, and whether we have to deal with a new substance every week or every couple of years, if we have a system that we can deal with it, then we're not reinventing the wheel each time we see another one of the things, these items fly through our city and land on one of our middle schoolers' desks. So unless there's a better option, a better suggestion, I think we have to do something, and I'll support Peggy's motion.
Bill?
I guess I'm going to probably, I'm going to oppose this in that I don't see a distinction between those mind-altering items that are also controlled substances like stimulants or depressants that may be administered through prescriptions. I just see this as pretty loose, and I can't stomach it.
And I'm going to support Phil's position. I think that if we're going to start restricting behavior that citizens have, we need to have a good reason to do that. And that good reason to do that would be that there's detrimental effects, or there's some cause, some social issue that's happening, or there's some serious side effects to other people. To just state right now that we want to monitor and create ordinances anytime somebody comes up with something that's synthetic, to even understand exactly what the scope of that is, I think is incredibly broad-based, and I don't want to get in that business. From a personal philosophy viewpoint, I don't want to spend the money. I don't want to be on the leading edge of getting a lab together where we can test this stuff so that we can know that what we've declared is illegal is actually what we're finding. I think we ought to at least wait until the problem presents itself and we see it being an issue. And if the problem presents itself and it becomes an issue, then the DEA will take it up. Once the DEA takes it up, we could then use that as a mechanism to stop the sale. So for me, I think that this is just unnecessarily overreaching. Peggy?
So in response to that, at least the intent of my motion was based on all the information in this packet that I'm assuming, but may be wrong, so our attorney will have to clarify for me, that this would be relating to variations of things that now are going to be in the state and the Fed laws. This is not wide open, just synthetic anything. Am I right that you can write this that would keep it in that ballpark?
Right. I mean, we would have to, because we have to justify the health, safety, welfare reasons for enacting these types of laws, which is why we asked Poison Control and the school to be here today. What kinds of effects are you seeing specifically off bath salt and their derivatives? So we can't just legislate all synthetic. We can only pick ones that come on the market and that we can then produce the data that would show that there is a legitimate health, safety, welfare reason.
Yeah, thank you.
But once again, if that is an issue, the easiest and fastest way to immediately address that is to call up the state who's already running a bill for this to take care of it. But the motion is to instruct the staff to bring us ordinances that ban synthetic drugs as they come on the market. All in favor of that, raise your hands. Which is Jim, Deb, Bruce, and Peg. Opposed is Bill, myself, and Jose. All right, it passes 4-3. brings us to the next item,
Can
which
we have a
is
short break before we go to the next item?
And Mary, thank you, and Lucinda, thank you. Thanks for coming here. You're very, very informative, and I think you helped the council discussion quite a bit. So thanks for giving us your time.
And Cindy's report was really in detail. I appreciated having that.
Right.
Before we break real quick,
Just to compliment the Sergeant Mitchell, too, a very, very comprehensive report. Thank you.
I don't want to make a motion for this, but I think just the general encouragement of police efforts to look at or investigate or make sure that there are not sales occurring where sales are not supposed to occur, whether it's out the front door or the back door, is certainly a good thing. Okay.
all righty, let's take a 7-minute break and come back and talk to them. So we have to go back to this 2-2.
Yeah.
then there's, well, two major things, then the exec session thing.
Well, we have
I wish you'd send
We
that
have
this
several
two
way.
major things plus two other
Said I
things.
wish you'd send
Little
this one
things,
out
little
to us.
things.
Well,
Yeah.
in theory.
Do we want to
Well,
defer? I need to keep deferring open space. Do we want to defer?
no.
You can do that if you so choose.
No, I'm just asking.
All right, we are back in session. A minute late. Almost with your time.
No, we're a minute ahead.
You run a tight ship.
Yeah, next issue is open space.
Council, Charlie Bloston's going to present this. This is a follow-up to your workshop a couple of weeks ago, and you had requested that you had quite a discussion about open space priorities, and I think also Councilwoman Brinkman had asked specifically that some sort of discussion of, you had a previous discussion on the Abear property, and so Charlie is just prepared to discuss both of those.
Okay.
Kelly asked me to hand this out. You're getting now. We have a map of the Abear property. Paul, did you get one? No.
Judge? Might as well get in the flow of what's going on.
Move your map.
Council, this is Santa Fe Drive here. River to the west. The property owned by Mr. Abear is this L-shaped parcel right here. This is, we identify it as Briarwood Avenue. It's a semi-paved road. We use recycled asphalt to pave it from Santa Fe Drive up to the park. Reynolds Landing Park is up to the northwest. This is the central construction site, and this is the Meadowwood Village trailer park. So this is the acreage Mr. Abear has addressed concerning possible acquisition by the city. If you wish to pursue that,
Charlie.
we have to do an appraisal and follow the normal process. That has not been identified by GOCO as a potential acquisition of the South Platte Working Group.
Do you know acreage and chunks of that? Or
I
just
believe the Abear property was 13 acres. the total.
14.
14.
14 on the L-shape.
Like
This would be,
That's about 7.
yeah, it's probably almost 50-50 if you take this and then take this part here.
And if I can add, one of the reasons it was not on the GOCO list is because it came late. The property was not one that the landowner, and GOCO will only participate in the South Platte Working Group, will only consider parcels where there's a willing landowner that would be interested in selling it. And Mr. Abear had not indicated that he was interested in selling it for open space. When we were going through the legacy program, it was not on that list for that reason. It wasn't until near the end of that program when there was some projects that had to be pulled because they weren't shovel ready, pardon. And this property at that point was, Mr. Abear was in between wanting to sell it as offer to the city for open space, and then also would, I think a offer had come up at that point, and he said, I'm entertaining this offer, and we were unable to meet a deadline. When that offer went away, it was too late to get in on the last deadline in order to be able to be considered in the kind of pickup projects at the end of the GOCO money. So that's the reason why it wasn't, so.
If I could also add, onto the list that you have that was passed out tonight, there are some items not on there. The Big Dry Creek Trail is not included. Neither is the recently acquired Lee Gulch parcel on Santa Fe, on the south side of Lee Gulch, or the Murray property, which is the former salvage yard on the west side of Santa Fe, or the Big Dry Creek Trailhead property in the northeast corner of the city. So that's not a 100% complete list, and there may be other items that are missing, so I haven't gone through that in detail. I just saw it tonight.
Big Dry Creek?
Big Dry Creek Trail property between the river and Washington Street, the Big Dry Creek Trailhead property, which was about 5 acres, Lee Gulch, which was 6.5, Murray, 2 parcels totaling about 6 acres.
Okay.
Take a picture of this with your cell phone?
Council, and Doug, if you don't mind, in order to expedite, I'd like to just make a couple suggestions.
Sure.
We've kind of been talking about this for a while now, and I think that actually since December, as a council, we've had a couple of study sessions already, and it was in our workshop. I like staff's idea about creating an open space task force. I think what Charlie presented to us at the workshop was pretty all-encompassing map and identity of parcels around the community that have that viability. Whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, if it's better for a different type of use. His map is basically just saying, here's what's open. I would suggest, if council would be, amenable to it, is that we create a small task force to identify, at least in terms of certain criteria, what would be a priority list for the parcels, and maybe to identify those that would not be a consideration, and then that this task force would then be assigned to bring back. I mean, the task force could include someone from, Trust for Public Land, who would be smart in how you deal with these things and what's the market value and those, what's going on out there. Maybe even other people who might be funding partners, someone from South Suburban, someone from Arapahoe County, almost a mini South Platte working group, but wouldn't certainly have that kind of expanse or power. But that we make an evaluation and then make a recommendation to council whether or not pursuing an appraisal on the ABAR property based on these criteria, priorities on the other ones based on a criteria that is established, so that we have some sort of formalized system for evaluating these and either moving forward or not moving forward. At some point, having them all just kind of floating atop is probably not good for people who may be looking at future developments in Littleton. And it might be a good idea to have some sort of system in place that delineates some priorities. And I'd like to, just throw that out there. That might be the next best way to move forward.
Jim?
I think creating a task force of citizens, Littleton citizens, is a great idea, because then they can bring in outside people to speak, Trust for Public Land, South Suburban County Open Space, whomever they need to have to do that. But having a group of citizens make recommendations to us, I think, is always good. My question is, somebody has got to staff that, and who would that be? I don't think that well, maybe you could, although it's kind of like a ship without a rudder. to send a group of citizens out there to talk about this type of subject without having somebody from staff trying to guide them. But I do think it's a great idea.
I think a task force would include, I would certainly expect it to include a council person. I think it should include definitely staff. It should include some members of the community. It should include representatives of funding partners. So I don't think it should be all one or the other, all government, all staff, or all citizens, but a blend.
I think that's an important distinction because when we talked about the task force, at least Charlie and I think we had more in mind kind of the template that we had with, and Doug, you may remember this, the 1996 Open Space Task Force, where really it was more, South Suburban had a person on there, the city council had a person on there, we actually had a realtor who had been involved with several property owners was on there. I'm trying to think, Charlie, who else? Because part of the issue...
Land conversion.
Yeah, I think, anyway, so the sense that we had was more not just a kind of a lay citizens committee who would be starting from scratch, but more a group of informed people at the table that would actually, and if you, we could, for some of you who may have not seen the 96 task force, but it was focused very specifically on properties around the South Platte Park. And they then identified, even going back with the Newton Trust property, which was the old Quig Newton property, the Enzer property. We even talked about the Kiewit gravel mining operation, which ended up being a 217-acre reservoir. But to talk about, for example, the concepts, I mean, just to take an example of the Aber property, without actually having some tangible concepts of what it would be, which in my judgment would have to be, is South Suburban at the table and saying we want this for ball fields, or is somebody else at the table that's saying this should be wildlife habitat? I mean, I'm just kind of making stuff up, but you'd need some technical expertise. So that's the kind of task force we were talking about that would then come.
That's what if I miscommunicated, that's where my head was.
Yeah, because I was hearing something different from what Jim was saying, was that when he said a citizens group who was going to staff it, because if you have a technically competent group like that, they're pretty much going to staff it themselves. I mean, we could coordinate it, but I think if I remember on the 96 task force, at that time, the manager planning for South Suburban. Bill Woodcock. Yes, thank you. Bill Woodcock was on there. I try to remember the realtor. But anyway, so I just some clarification, because when Jim responded to you, Debbie, I heard something different. That's why I wanted to clarify that. So anyway, just to add to the conversation.
If you wanted to make a motion that said something like, to council people, TPL, South Suburban Parks and Rec, South Metro Land Conservancy, that might not be a bad motion to make.
Why don't you put just a number there, this work, to fill it?
I don't know, I would throw someone from city staff. In 96, it was the city manager that was part of the group, so that the city staff is there. I've gone through and I asked the staff for some statistics. I mean, one of the things we also need to balance is sustainability in the city, not just from a park space perspective, because almost a third of our land is currently tax exempt too. So there's a balance.
I thought those questions that you sent out were very good questions.
Share the answers.
Bruce? Jim mentioned somebody with realtor background. I think is not a bad idea either, who's got visibility to both open space and commercial and residential, sort of, I think was what Phil's saying too.
The other alternative is TPL, which would bring you appraisal, realtor experience, but it would be from the orientation of open space. So if you're looking for a counter viewpoint, then
Well, I think the balance, though, I was sort of getting a little bit of this when you were talking about priorities, which is what are the criteria? And one of the criteria in my mind has to be, I think what sort of Phil's saying, which is what are commercial opportunities relative to the broader scope of how much open space we've got? So I'd sort of like to have both viewpoints personally.
And let me just comment, and Dennis just handed me Clint Bloom, who I'd forgotten, but the mission as has been proposed by Debbie here is quite a bit broader. The 96 task force, as I said, was specifically looking at kind of buffering and protecting the South Platte Park. And Mr. Bloom was a representative of the Polo Reserve, which was just getting involved, going in, and they were very involved. We were very involved in negotiations with them, and they actually then ended up contributing quite a bit of amenities on the west side of the park. So that was a very specific appointment because they were adjacent landowners and were very, very involved in negotiating a lot of other things with the city. But clearly, I mean, again, like I had mentioned to you that Dave Buck, the owner of Meadowwood, who's an adjacent landowner, but that could be somebody that the task force could bring in and talk to and get testimony and that kind of stuff.
It may be a phased assignment of a task force where initially we start with a city council member, staff member, South Suburban, Arapahoe County TPL, and that group meets to determine what's missing, who else would, what are the other entities that would be beneficial to the group, and kind of put together some guidelines, a process to follow, and then start plugging some things in. To decide all that now, we may leave someone out or put someone in that maybe shouldn't be in, and it would start to make it more difficult. I think keeping it to what we know and allowing that entity to then expand to what they need may be the most appropriate. So should I make a motion to that?
Please, I would suggest 2 council people. Go ahead.
Okay. Make a motion to create an open space task force to include 2 sitting city council members, a staff member, a member from South Suburban Parks and Rec, a member from Arapahoe County, and a representative from Trust for Public Land.
You want South Metro Land Conservancy? Or do you want to stop there?
I think we'll stop there, and then
That's 6 people.
Would you read that list again then?
Okay. The motion is to create an open space task force consisting of 2 council members, a city staff, a member of South Suburban Park and Rec, somebody from Arapahoe County, and TPL, Trust for Public Lands. I'll second that. Discussion. Bill?
I'm still considering this, but one of the things that a number of other cities have undertaken is rather than just having a set of folks that are vested somewhat has been an approach that they've used in a master planning approach, which would actually go out to the citizens and utilize some of that as input and what would come through. It's not to say the task force couldn't, but it was labeled under more of a master planning approach, so that you started with a thought that indeed part of that was going to be some public hearings as well, and gaining input from the citizens.
Okay. Jim?
This list of people, when you look at it, has the potential to be all great advocates of open space. I'm wondering about the possibility of having someone who would tend to bring groups back down to earth every now and then, and having a business commercial type person as part of this original group?
Well, the city staff person should bring everybody down to earth.
Depends.
Well,
If it's the wet blanket.
if I wrote this down, would you read the motion again, and then I think I have a comment.
Motion is to create an open space task force that consists of 2 city council members, and she said 2 sitting city council members, city staff, member from South Suburban Park and Rec, member from somebody from Arapahoe County, and Trust for Public Lands.
Okay. Creating a task force, or any body, I think, whatever body would be created, but in this case, a task force for open space, needs to have a charge, I think. What is it they're supposed to do? We talked about it, it's out there, but it's not in the motion. And I think if we define what the task is, that would constrain the focus. It would bring in the sustainability piece, I think, and so forth. But what is it supposed to do? Deb, can you phrase that?
I would suggest that the intent of a task force at this point is somewhat broad-based, and it will be incumbent upon that task force to narrow that scope based on what there is. At this point, I see number one priority would be, the number one intention of the task force would be to prioritize existing open space within Littleton for consideration to be purchased as open space. And then to evaluate, once that's prioritized, then to evaluate against a certain set of criteria, which would be established by the task force, and input certainly from, I think, people who would be valuable at inputting. And that would mean, I don't have a problem if you bring in realtors and developers. You're not going to just ask the choir to recite the Bible. Nobody's getting any good religion that way. If you really want to make a good decision and you really want to do something that you can get buy off on, then you have a convergence of minds from different ilk. So I think that this core task force would be in charge of the expansion of that, and that the primary function of the task force is simply to prioritize and then determine the viability of existing land. That's been already indicated that it could potential for open space purchase.
So, but if we're looking at a potential open space properties, purchase for open space properties, it would seem to me that would be have a goal to promote what Littleton values, its character, whatever, while also ensuring or taking into consideration sustainability, economic and otherwise. That's the commercial piece. Jim, you served on so many things, so help with this a little. Because what you're trying to do is constrain a little bit for the economic vitality of the city, right? So we just don't buy up everything and don't have anything left over, right, for economic development or whatever. So, but we're wanting to balance health, safety, welfare, the values of recreation and so forth with sustainability, economic and otherwise.
I'm not going to ignore that part, but I want to ask Jim a question. If we task you to come forth with a job description for this committee, so that we have something to take pot shots at, so to speak. I always react a lot better when I see something in writing and I know how I would like to see it changed, and
Well,
I
we
think
could
every one of us do that.
If this motion, if the direction is to have the staff put together a draft.
Solve your problem.
A draft charge and bring it back to you, then all 7 of you can take a look at it and say.
Why couldn't, if this motion passes and we form this group, why can't that group then do exactly that and bring it back? Then it would come back to council to be ratified, and then that group would act upon it. That would be.
I think before you would look at participation on the group, you'd want to know what the goals of the group are going to be.
Yeah.
And that's really our, I'll put it in purview position, and I kind of like the suggestion of having those, at least some draft goals before we go off and charge a group.
And you really don't want them wasting their time doing that sort of thing.
Right.
They need to be focused on the task that we want them to focus on.
So, Jim, how long would it take you guys to do that?
I think we could have something in front of you next week.
That's what, so
Yeah. And I'm just basing on, as has been broadly articulated by Debbie, coming out of the workshop, and then, like I said, we do have the template of the 96 task force. I think we could have, under your general business next week, we could take a shot at wordsmithing the big view, the broad view that Debbie's articulated, with some of the more what I'll call specific evaluation criteria, charge, if you will, that we've heard people discuss here, and then you could take a look at where you thought it was either it hit the mark or needed to be expanded or didn't hit what you had expected. And like Jim said, give you something very specific and concrete to react to.
Bruce? I was just going to ask you, in a general sense, did you, holistically, as far as the task force is concerned, did you have a timeline in mind as far as this thing starts, for the sake of an argument, April 1st, what do you expect to accomplish when?
Well, I think there would have to be a end date for the group. Part of what I think we have to consider is the finances, and we've got a certain amount of money for open space, but I don't think it's on forever and ever type of thing. And I don't know. I know that there's, for instance, on the Abear property, I mean, there's a willing seller who has an urgency, and so if you're going through it and you're basing priorities, he may become a higher priority, and that may need to, the land sales move at a very slow pace. But part of that, I think, would be some good direction from TPL, too, as to how long you can expect to have appraisals take, and then, if there's how long does the process take? So when do you really need to start kicking in here? But I would say, I would think it'd be good to look at it for maybe 18 to 24 months. Would be, Charlie, you like that idea? I mean, you've got some knowledge there.
Yeah, 18 to 24 would be a good time period. I just mentioned to the mayor, you have 2 working groups now dealing with open space. The South Platte Working Group is just completing their mission. There are 2 projects in Littleton that within the next couple of months will be done. The Ackerman acquisition and the East Side Trail. And then South Platte Working Group is pretty much complete with their purpose. The other one is the Highline Canal Working Group, and that one is, it's not just getting started, but it's getting momentum and identifying their purpose and various projects they want to work on. So those 2 are part of what this committee would want to consider as a part of the overall picture. And 18 to 24 months would probably be the maximum. You might be able to do it in a shorter time period.
Less than that.
I'm just using part of what was the experience before, and if you say the group gets together twice a month, 10 meetings might be one of those things, so I'm looking at a 5-month period, because one of the things that each one of those working groups did was they were involved in execution. This is a task force basically to prioritize and leave execution low.
Making recommendations.
And I sure don't see any problem with Jim and I getting together and putting a proposed mission charge together by your next council meeting for Tuesday night. I don't think that'll be a difficult project.
Peggy, you're going to make a motion to
Yeah.
postpone this?
Yes, I move that we postpone this until, what is this?
Next Tuesday.
March the 15th.
15th, yes, ma'am.
During general discussion, at which time,
Stop.
and request, city manager and whoever he wants to bring us a charge, a recommended charge to the committee, to the group.
Okay. I'll second that. So it's been moved to postpone this until March 15th, bring it back on general business with a recommended charge from Jim Woods. Discussion on the postponement. All in favor, raise your hands. That's, who's opposed? That'll be easier. Jose? Okay. So it's 6-1.
Hungry tonight, aren't you?
It's either him or me. We're the oldest, we get special privileges.
All right. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I did ask a few questions of staff, and I'd just like to throw them out, some of the responses. Again, the time frame didn't necessarily allow for a great amount of detailed analysis in some of this, but the question was asked, what is the national average or the median for ratio of open space in a city approximately the size of Littleton? And the answer to that is a little bit less than 11 acres per 1,000 of population. Given that Littleton would have roughly 42,000 of acres, our population of 42,000 would have roughly about 440 acres, and we currently run about 3.5 times that as far as our current park allocation. So the next was inventory of open space acreage currently in Littleton, and that's where we get the ratio. Although in the analysis, the 7 acres around Enzer, the 6 or so acres with Lee Gulch and Murray each having weren't included in that, but there's a little less than 1,500 acres of inventory of park, and so that's part of what this list represents. I ended up with the Open Space Task Force from 1996 based on the other question is what's been the priority and criteria considered for that, and that was the reference that was there. An interesting item is per commercial property in Littleton. There's currently just a little bit less than 20 full-time employees per acre of commercial property that is currently within the city. And then there was some additional information that Jim has as well that I didn't have a chance to get to the additional tabs inside the spreadsheet that was shared.
Well, can I suggest that you have that attached as part of the communication for the general business?
Sure, we can, and that's courtesy of Eric Irving and the BIA staff, so they continue to be a very good, timely source of information. But yes, we can package everything that we sent to Councilman Cernanek, and we'll include it as an attachment.
Thank you. Our next item then is the discussion of the city manager recruitment process. Eric?
Eric Von Savage, your HR director, is here tonight to discuss this process with you. And council, I don't know if I mentioned to you, but Phil Cortese is out of town with a death in the family.
It's too bad.
Chart? Yeah.
Maybe I ought to start this, if that's okay. I met with Eric and Phil Ortiz last week to talk about what kind of format of information to bring back to council for tonight's meeting, because we decided whenever that we wanted to start the process tonight. What you have in front of you is something that Eric drew up based on roughly what happened 12 years ago when we went through a city manager search. So this is one alternative that we could follow. And the basic outline of this is we would do an RFP to select a headhunting firm to assist with the selection of the city manager. The RFP would come back, you can see on the timeline, RFP would come back around the end of April. Council would select one of the firms from the response to the RFP. That firm, if this is what council chose to do, would then create a profile of the city and a profile of what the council was looking for in a city manager. They would then conduct the search, qualify the candidates, bring the candidates back to the council. Council would then interview the candidates, make an offer, and complete the process. So if that's the direction the council wants to go down, what you see is a draft or approximate timeline that we would probably have to meet if we're going to go through that process to get a new city manager on board by the end of September, which is our goal. If the council wants to go through a different process, then we would have to figure out what that process is, and come up with a different timeline for that. Bruce?
What's the expectation in terms of the number of firms you're going to approach with an RFP, with the RFP, and are you recommending, and I haven't read this obviously, but are you recommending retainer versus contingency types of expertise?
The finance department actually has a website that's now kind of standardized and used for putting RFPs out. And so you would probably look at receiving quite a number of proposals to review. We've worked with about 6 in the past, give or take maybe a few more than that, over Littleton's history that they're familiar with. So certainly those firms would submit.
These are general headhunter
Correct.
firms as opposed to anybody who specializes in municipal.
The request would be that they would specialize in some of that. So in that you would look at towards your request for proposal information, and you could customize that any way that you would like. So you can ask them to have experience specifically looking for those top positions, and as part of your criteria when you're selecting that group, you may decide that you want them to have experience specifically even right down to recruiting city managers, which narrows your pool quite a bit.
How do you feel about consultant versus contingency headhunter versus a retainer headhunter? You did the judge search with a consultant, not a headhunter.
I think the difference here is that it depends whether you want to do a national or a local search. So you'd have to answer that question first. And if you're going to go and do a national search, you're going to find that working with these headhunter agencies, they're pretty well adept at finding those candidates and then working through the screening process. Working with a consultant would be a little bit different. Typically what you're going to find is each of these headhunters will put together and can present to you in your RFP review process what team you would work with. So they would introduce whoever they're going to say in their organization specializes in recruiting the position that you are looking for specifically, and that they would assign to this task.
But how do you address, in your experience with this kind of stuff, how do you address the issue of them searching broadly versus you getting their stable of resumes?
Well, I think it's in part and parcel dependent upon who's interested at the time. Obviously, they do some of their recruitment is through advertising, promoting the position, but some of it is through individuals that they stay in contact with and that they are aware are looking. I think they do a fairly good job of bringing around. If they have a good profile process, which would be part of your expectation with them, they can do a pretty good selection process for you in narrowing down those candidates that would be a good fit for your size city, your size organization, and the types of things that you're looking for.
But part of the answer is we could specify in the RFP what types of advertisements and where we wanted them to search.
Right. If you wanted a state search and nothing more, you could specify that. If you wanted something broader than that, even regional, they could do Western region. They can break it down, or they break the country down into whatever part you want it to be.
What's your sense of the magnitude of the cost of doing this, just out of curiosity?
Somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000.
Oh, it's full boat. That includes job offer, background search, the whole enchilada.
Right. From beginning to end. And you can...
Erica checked around. Aurora just did a national search and used a national recruiter, and that's what they paid. Some of it may depend on what you get from your request, but that seems at least based on a very recent placement, a national search by the city of Aurora, that it seems like at least a ballpark number.
Isn't that what went to the firm? That didn't include travel to bring in the candidates, or?
I don't know the details of that, sir.
It usually can include all of that. They usually try to leave a clause that says there are certain expenses that are flexible, but you can also put in a clause, a not to exceed expense, and that any expenses outside of your agreement would need to be consulted with the city prior to expending.
And some of it's going to depend on the scope of your assignment. I mean, it depends. I don't know exactly what Aurora did, but I know from previous national searches that we've done, some of it depends on how much time does the staff of the firm have to spend here. Are they going to do extensive interviews? Are they expected to come back? We did national recruiting for police chief, finance director. So some of it is what's that total scope of services that you're expecting. And in those instances, they did the recruiting, we conducted the assessment center. If you want them to conduct the assessment center, then it's a broader scope of services. So some of that will depend on, if Eric puts together something for you, what the total breadth of services that you're expecting a firm to provide to you.
And at least from my perspective, on Councilman Stallman's question of retainer versus contingency, since there's a fair amount of this time that's being spent on selection of the firm, I was envisioning more of a retainer type search. And that might be my preference too, because then the reputation of the firm and a good placement is on the line, where a contingency selection, you wouldn't, it's basically, you hire what you get and it's pushed at you.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Well, can I suggest that the decision that we need to make tonight is if we want to follow a process where we hire a company to come in and do the search for us. If that's what the council decides they want to do, then the next step would be to come up with the RFP. So if we decided tonight that we wanted to follow that process, then the next step would be that Eric or whoever comes up with a suggested RFP, it comes back to council. We would then decide if we agreed with that RFP, and the RFP would describe the process, what we expected out of the company. So those decisions would happen at the next step if we decided this is what we wanted to go down. Deb?
Both the city attorney and the judge, who are also council charges, we had a interview committee, or we had two members from council who served kind of as a initial. Do we want to try to do that again, or kind of to work as clearing out some of the stuff, working with staff on that? Maybe they could help write the RFP. I mean, the stuff comes back to council, but you've got a couple of council people giving initial input on it too, so that...
Well, we could do that. I guess my recommendation is going to be that we do the whole council rather than do a subcommittee, at least at this point in time. And part of the reason for that is if we go through the RFP process, we already have other cities that have done it recently, and we did it ourselves a decade ago. So we have a process that we can look at for coming up with the procedure. It's a little different than the judges, where we hadn't selected a judge for decades, or 2 decades. So,
Well, city manager.
Pardon?
We haven't done a city manager
In 12
12
years.
years. So.
Yeah.
Well, I support getting a search firm too.
Okay.
And I prefer a search firm specializing obviously in municipal leadership as opposed to a consultant.
Okay, so your motion is to...
Oh, I'm making a motion?
Yes, please.
And I'll second it.
I'll make it.
The motion,
Okay.
which Jim has seconded, is that we employ a search firm to help us procure a city manager.
Right.
Correct. Discussion?
The only thing is, I would say is, that the technical term, it could be executive recruitment firm, it could be, something other than a search firm, and so I would have an understanding that term by itself not be a narrowing term, but a broad term.
Well, since you may be the only one that knows the distinction, I don't think it's going to be a narrowing term.
Eric does.
Okay, so, but the next step, if this passes, the next step is we would then see a draft RFP, which the council would decide to do. And if in the process of working with this, it turns out that we can't do it at the council level, we may be forced to create a subcommittee.
What is this, Doug?
Pardon?
What is this?
That's
Is
sort
this
of...
a draft RFP?
Yes, but this is the first time you guys have seen it.
That's right.
So
But it is a draft of the
it
RFP.
is a draft RFP. So I think that it ought to come to you in advance, so everybody has a chance to read it and think about it before. And if you look at our suggested timeline, we would need to have the RFP completed so that we could post it by April. So That gives us a couple meetings to do it. So depending on Eric's time frame, we may get one back on the 15th. We may choose to devote the 22nd to it. Bruce?
Is there any value when we've done this before on a couple of these things? I remember we had, was it Tom Donahue was in on some of this stuff. Is there any value in terms of this initial process, having an external set of eyes, or are you guys confident that you can pretty much get where we need to go without it?
I think that what you'll find is a lot of these RFPs are done pretty similarly. So, for example, we referenced, in order to come up with this draft 2, one, Arvada recently went through a city manager search, and Aurora
So you're
recently.
looking at a score.
Boulder did too.
So we've been pulling those where we've been able to get them, and then putting together sort of those basic pieces in the RFP that you would want to have as part of the components as your request. And if there's anything that is a burning interest for anybody, then you would want to maybe take this framework that we've been borrowing and adding to and customizing it, and customize it further to meet what your expectations are and what you're looking for.
Now, can I suggest, and this is predicated on your schedule, if this passes, could you get us a draft RFP for the meeting on the 15th?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, which would mean that you'd have to get it in the packet by Thursday. And that way, if we get bogged down on the 15th, and that gives us the 22nd, we'll just allocate some time at the study session on the 22nd to do it. We can't make a decision on the 15th.
And Eric, one consideration in putting the draft together, at least that I've seen in executive searches, not municipal searches, but some leeway once the firm has had a chance to interview council, interview staff, possibly interview members of the community, is allowing for some sort of modification component that they might suggest, so that it's not like we're holding them to a set of handcuffs that are set, but we actually want them to be thinking partners in the effort.
So once they've developed the profile, you'd want them to bring the proposal back, or the profile back, so that you could review it.
And you know, if there's something that's been outlined in the process that maybe they would suggest, key interviews, key members, discussion items, could be a number of items that could be adjusted, tweaked, I guess would be probably a reasonable term. But that we certainly don't want it to be a rote exercise.
And I think you'll find that typically your group here, the council, is going to actually try to designate for whoever you select who you want them to speak to and how you want that process to carry through.
All right, further discussion on the motion? Debbie and Jim's motion was to employ a search firm to procure city manager. You guys ready to vote? All in favor? Okay, 7-0. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. You can't be on me on this one.
Next item, Jim, is Housing Authority.
Yes, I sent out a memo an email to all the council that the Housing Authority is having our retreat to create a 5-year plan in May. And if we meet next week, or 2 weeks from tonight, with the Housing Authority, it would be primarily about the old plan that's going out of existence this year. We're required to do a 5-year plan, and I don't know when we're talking about setting it up for the 22nd. I didn't have my thinking cap on about not having a new plan to talk about. But it'd be much more productive if we waited till after that 5-year plan is developed by the authority, and we'll be doing that, sending out the drafts proposals in May, and then in June we will get the first look at that plan and in July, we'll finalize that plan. So it would be better if we could move the Housing Authority meeting until the latter half of July the first part of July to the middle of August. Next, 2 weeks from tonight, the chairman of the authority is out of town, as well as one other member of the authority. I do think we could probably get a quorum of the group here if you want to do it on the 22nd. But we also would like to do a tour for City Council of all the housing projects that we've got, and that would require a bus of about, that would hold anywhere from 15 to 20 people. And Dan Burnham, I talked to him just before 5 o'clock this afternoon, and he's got about 4 or 5 inquiries into places that has a bus that big that would accommodate us, but he doesn't have anything firmed up right now. But in response to an email that Peggy sent me, we could propose doing it July 10, 17, 24, 31, or August 7, 14. So
Is the tour or the meeting?
the tour and the meeting, both would be on a Saturday.
Can I suggest that we have the tour and the meeting separate? Because the tour may take a couple hours.
That's right. That's why we're going to do it on Saturday morning.
Okay, I think the meeting and the tour ought to be 2 separate instances. Because otherwise it ends up being a very long.
So what else is new? I mean, every time we meet, it's a long meeting. I'm just trying to accommodate, there's a whole bunch of people involved in this, and it's taking a Saturday out of their day to do the tour, and just adding another hour onto it to talk about what the plan is for the next 5 years.
Well, what I'm thinking is do we need to have the entire housing board to take a tour, or could we just have Dan Burnham take the council and whoever else wants to go on a tour of the property sometime between now and July? And then in July, after you guys finalize or get your 5-year plan to a certain point, we then meet with the Housing Authority Board.
We can do whatever you want to do, but the Housing Board would like to go on the tour.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to exclude them, I just
Yeah.
thought that they probably...
Well, it's just like council turns over, the Housing Authority turns over too, and there's some of them that would like to go on the tour.
Okay, that makes perfect sense then.
But I thought I copied you all, but maybe not. I'd kind of like to talk to them before the tour, before they do their 5-year plan, in case I know they're independent, but still seems to me it might be nice if we happen to have any thoughts that they would work into their 5-year plan.
Well, you could do that, but then you're talking either 2 or 3 meetings. You'd have a pre-5-year plan meeting with the Housing Authority. You would then have the Housing Authority doing their 5-year plan. You would then have them meet back with us, or you'd have a tour with them.
Well, if nobody else thinks there might be something we'd like to share that would affect their plan, then that's a non-issue.
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. I mean, there's that would be ideal, is to meet with them twice, because if we had something, a comment that would affect the 5-year plan, it'd be nice to know that in advance. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that I know at this point enough to be able to suggest a comment. So.
And a lot of the 5-year plan is going to be following what is required by HUD and the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, dealing with our Section 8 housing, our low-income housing, dispersed housing, all like that will be part of the plan. And those are all requirements that have to be there.
Council, what's your druthers?
I think if you want to have, I would suggest having one meeting. If you want to do it on that Saturday, we meet business meeting for an hour, and then For those who have the time and are able to go on the tour, then they can do that. But I would just suggest one meeting.
I think you need to do it the other way around, because if you take the tour, you then may have questions that you'd want to ask.
Well, can't you talk on the bus?
Well,
Oh.
and I had a discussion with Susan Beckman about some different housing issues, and part of what I thought was going to happen when we met with the Housing Authority is they would discuss funding mechanisms and different other types of housing, and she wants to hear that because she wants to know what's going on, because Arapahoe County distributes some CDBG, and some of that's related to housing. So I don't think having that part of the meeting on the bus,
And we do part of their Section 8 vouchers for the county.
yeah, is appropriate, and that's why I was sort of thinking of separating the two. But, you know, if we do it all on one day, I'm not adverse to that. I just think that there's some things that we want to get out of the meeting that,
Would we televise the meeting? Would it be here?
well, it all depends. If we do a tour and then do a meeting, then we could have the meeting here and it'd be televised and it'd be just like a regular council meeting. If we do it on a Saturday, then I guess we could come back to here, but then we have to hire yes, thank you, the videographer to do it. So
Is it possible to have a tour like 5 o'clock on a Tuesday? Have a 2-hour tour?
Make it a 3-hour tour then.
Well,
Gilligan's on
you do it early enough in July because of darkness. It doesn't do any good to do a tour when it's dark.
Well, it's not going to get dark before 7 o'clock. Won't get dark before 8 o'clock in July.
well, the first issue is, do we want to stick to the May 22nd schedule, or do we not want to? And my inclination is it makes sense not to do it.
It does make sense not to do it on the 22nd.
Okay.
Is there anybody that still wants to meet the May 22nd schedule?
It's March 22nd.
March,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, March 22nd, which is like 2 weeks from now.
Right, it was to be your outreach meeting this
So
month.
let's formalize this into what is a motion.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and we're already voting on not meeting with them on March 22nd. All in favor of not doing that? 7-0.
I guess I would have a recommendation for you,
Yes,
council, is perhaps having the tour, and Suzanne kind of touched on this, if you want to do the tour on a Saturday morning, if it's going to be in the summer, like a 9 to noon or something like that, and then try to schedule it so that you would come back here for a study session, so that then you don't get into any issues of a posting, of open meetings, people not being able to hear the discussion. So, because we've had this before, actually, where if you've got all 7 of you on a bus, it's a public meeting.
If there's discussion.
If there's discussion, right, if there's discussion. So what you may want to consider is a Saturday morning, which, again, doesn't block out a whole day. I would think of 3, I don't know, I haven't seen Dan's tour, but I would say like a 9 to noon or something like that on a Saturday. And then schedule your public discussion for whatever that following or a very upcoming study session that you would be here. It would be televised. It would be posted. You would be able to discuss what you saw, what you heard, what your issues were, and it would all be, for anybody who's interested, neighborhoods, people would come here, could observe the whole thing. That would be my recommendation to you.
Jim, do you think we can come up with a date now, or do you think they need to go a little bit further through the process to know when they'll have the 5-year plan done?
Well, the issue as I see it is we got to secure a bus and find out when it's available. Okay. And that was the hang-up that I was hoping Dan would have an answer by tonight, but he didn't.
Can we use an omnibus or shopping cart?
Those don't hold but 8 or 9 people.
Can we use 2 of them?
They hold more
Difficult to
than,
have Dan Burnham in 2 places if he's going to be leading the tour.
they hold more than that.
Well, then, in that case, then why don't we let Dan, give Dan some time to come up with, and we'll pick the date for the Saturday event at a future council meeting.
One of the things when I'm looking at the outreach schedule, you and I did switch, is this correct, the correct dates for you and I switched on my citizen forum?
Yes.
Let me move mine into September, later September, and use that July date for the study session for the Housing Authority. And then if we did, as you suggested, we'd do the Saturday prior to July 26th for the tour.
Can't
And then
you?
follow up with
I got an application.
study session on July 26th.
Okay. Well, Peggy has a problem with the 26th, but you're not going to be here the 26th?
No, I have another commitment already.
On the 26th?
Uh-huh. Excuse me, no, the 23rd. He's talking about if
Oh,
we
the
did
tour.
if we did it the tour the Saturday before. No, I'm okay on the Tuesdays.
Yeah, what about the 16th?
And that's Debbie's District 4 meeting, I think. Is it, Deb? Deb?
The 16th?
Yeah.
Could you move your District 4 meeting?
Well, she is in the afternoons anyway, don't you?
3 Bites of
Starts
the
at
Future.
1. Well, how long is this going to take?
I figured 2.5 hours is what I'm guessing, but I...
For the tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to see all the properties,
So we could do that on the 16th.
We do it.
We could do it in the morning, and then you could have your meeting at 1.
Would that work for you, Deb? To do that way?
Okay.
Will they have a map for us with the
Yeah.
properties
Yeah.
and the amount of units that are on each
I
one?
think they can.
Okay.
All right, so Jim's motion is that we set up the tour for the 16th of July, and that we meet with the Housing Authority on the 26th of July. And that we switch, do we need to switch the...
My citizen forum to sometime, one of the open dates in September or October.
Okay. And then we move the District 2, sorry, District 1. meeting
District 1.
to an open date. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Discussion? Ready to vote? Okay, 7-0. Thank you.
And just to not necessarily leave the 22nd open, since we don't necessarily have an agenda item, Mr. City Manager, I was wondering if possibly the staff could be prepared to take us through the review of the planning process flow charts, the scheduling of building permit inspections, and don't know whether it's...
Which 22nd are you talking about?
March 22nd.
Next week.
2 weeks.
Yeah, let me check with,
And possibly the PDO ordinance. I don't know.
let me check staff availability on that.
I thought maybe we might move the lighting ordinance up to that, because we just postponed that one, and then that would give more time, which is April 12th, maybe for
Didn't know.
the other. Guess you could check staff
The
to
thing
see.
about lighting ordinance is that we told those business people we were going to be doing it on the 12th.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or some-
okay.
Why don't you come up with an agenda for us on the 22nd?
Got it.
Yeah.
I was suggesting some items that were primarily staff.
All right, next item is study session scheduling. Peggy,
Well, that relates, we just took care of that one.
all right, then That brings us to executive session.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the city council convene an executive session.
There's one more item, setting a date for city attorney evaluation.
Okay. Sorry, Phil.
It's not because I necessarily have bad things, it's just that I don't want us to slip it off our radar.
All right, what date are you suggesting?
Well, I think we do it in May, I believe, so...
We do it in June, actually.
Her anniversary date's June 1st, so we want to do it before or
Okay,
after?
well, May, June, whatever. We get into June, we start crowding CML, but
Early June.
Okay, May 24th?
Okay.
Peggy moves that we do the attorney thing on May 24th.
Second.
Bruce seconds.
since I'm a stickler for preciseness, we'll make it city attorney evaluation.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Discussion. Let's ready to vote. 7-0.
Mr. Chairman, I now move that the City Council convene an executive session pursuant to CRS Section 24-6-402, paren 4, subsection F, for a personnel matter related to the judiciary.
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded. It takes 5 votes.
And we would include Jim Anderson.
All in favor, raise your hands. That's 7-0.
Is this, Suzanne, does this require taping?
What?
Does this require taping? Okay. So-
In that case, so then we need probably a,
It's set up
Is
in
it
the...
set up?
In the
you guys want a break, or you want to go right
business
now?
room.
This shouldn't.
All right,
I don't think it'll take long.
after.
I didn't know, I thought maybe you might
Okay,
want
give
to...
us 7 minutes to meander.
Go ahead and have Wendy.
Where is it?